Don't you believe in retirement?
No.
KFC today has more than 24,000 outlets in over 147 countries. But what most people do not know is that this company was founded by a man who had failed in almost every venture he had embarked on. However, his daring tenacity and firm resolve still enabled him to find success through creating what will in a few decades become one of the largest fast food chains in the world. This is the fascinating true story of Colonel Harland Sanders, the founder of Kentucky Fried Chicken, and how he marched from failure to failure and even faced a brutal lawsuit from his own company before ultimately finding success in his 60s.
I was 66 years old. I couldn't afford to quit. I had a moral obligation to give people something good, something worthwhile. See?
Colonel Harland Sanders came from a very poor background. He was born on a farm located 3 miles from Henryville, Indiana. Growing up, he had 2 young siblings. His father worked on an 80-acre farm until he broke his leg, after which he became a butcher. But unfortunately, things took a darker turn for the family when Harland lost his father at only 5 years old. This left his mother working all day on odd jobs like sewing clothes and peeling tomatoes at a canning factory to provide for her 3 children. Harland, on the other hand, was left to look out for his 2 siblings and do most of the cookings. Sometimes he even had to stay up to 11:30 at night making dinner. While this might not be the ideal thing for a 6-year-old to be doing, it will later serve him great in life. By the time he was 7 years old, he had gotten so good at making bread, vegetables, and meat. When he turned 10 years of age, he got his first job on a farm. But as a boy, he was easily distracted by the animals, so he got fired after just a month. This of course made his mother furious, and she said to him, "Here you are, my oldest son. Your father is dead and you are the only one I can look out for help with the other children. But you are of no account. You can't even hold a job for $2 a month." He was so ashamed from disappointing her that he told himself he will work harder the next time he gets a job. When he turned 12 years old, his mother married a man who was violent. He made it very clear that he didn't like the idea of having stepchildren. So after a year, Harland left home and worked in a farm again. He would get up before dawn to feed the animals, go to school during the day, and do odd jobs during the evening. He soon started 7th grade at 13 years old, but he dropped out after just 2 weeks because he found algebra too difficult. He continued to work in the farm for 2 more years before he quit to pursue several other careers. However, the next few years of Harland's life will turn out to be riddled with failures. First, as a young man, he toiled as a farmhand. When he turned 16, he faked his age to join the US Army. After serving in Cuba for a few months, his real age was discovered. This led him off with an honorable discharge before his 17th birthday. Then he became a streetcar conductor before working for railroad companies across the South. After getting fired, he studied law through a system via mail. He practiced in Arkansas for a while until he had a conflict with his own client in a courtroom. This of course derailed his legal career. He went on and became a steamboat operator. But unfortunately for him, a newly constructed bridge in the area rendered his services redundant. His next job was an oil lamp business, but it also failed as electricity reached rural America. He then sold life insurance and automobile tires. At one point in Corbin, Harland even delivered babies. He said in his autobiography, the husbands couldn't afford a doctor when their wives were pregnant. However, Harland was not successful in any of these careers, as he got fired most of the time, mainly because he was hot-headed. In 1908, he got married at 18 years old to Josephine King, with whom he had a son and 2 daughters. But because he wasn't able to hold on to a job for a long time, his marriage fell apart soon after he was fired from the railroad. His wife left him with their children and went to her parents in Alabama. After some time, Harland received a letter from his brother-in-law, in which he stated that his sister should never have married a man like him, who couldn't even hold a job. Harland then decided to reconcile with his wife, but that was after he had planned to kidnap his children and failed. However, the couple eventually get a divorce nearly 40 years later, after the tragic death of their son. In 1925, Harland hitchhiked from Louisville to Winchester out to job hunting. There he was picked on by the general manager of Standard Oil Kentucky in an oil and gas company. In the early days, the business was slow because customers were loyal to the last person who ran the gas station. Some people in the town wouldn't even look his way, so he decided to focus on customer service and offer something extra. Eventually, he earned more than $12,000 a month from selling gas, which was 3 times more than anyone had ever sold. But even this wouldn't last. His luck took a turn for the worst again when the Great Depression hit America. To make rent, he had to sell his own equipments. He realized that there's no point in staying, so he quit. Fortunately for him, another oil and gas company by the name Shell asked him to run a gas station that was being built in Corbin. He knew it was the only way he could ever make money again, so he accepted their offer and moved to Corbin in 1930 at the age of 40. To make some extra cash, He sometimes made meals for his customers with a single table which he had at the time that could only seat 6 people. At first, fried chicken was not on his menu because it took too long to prepare. He only made country ham, string beans, okra, hot biscuits, and later he added fried chicken, which eventually became his best seller. In his memo he wrote, "I believe that fried chicken is not American hospitality dish. I spell all those words with capital letters." He soon opened Sanders Cafe across the street and began to serve fried chicken in an iron skillet. As a marketing campaign, Harland would paint up giant signs on barns around the neighborhood that surrounded his gas station for miles around. His aggressive marketing tactic didn't take long to upset Matthew Stewart, an operator of a nearby competing oil station. Stewart began painting over Harland's signs, of which Harland clearly warned him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. One day, Harland was told that Stewart was painting over one of his signs for a second time, so he quickly rushed to the scene with 2 Shell executives. But upon seeing them, Stewart thought he was under attack, so he grabbed his gun and fired at Harland. Fortunately, the bullet missed him, but it hit one of the Shell executives and killed him on the spot. Luckily, Harland had a gun himself. He returned fire and wounded Stewart on the shoulder. All 3 men were immediately arrested on the spot. Stewart was sentenced to 18 years in prison for murder, while charges against Harland were dropped after he argued that he had fired in self-defense. This left him as the gas station king of Kentucky. As a result, sales of his gas station food surged so high that it caught the attention of the governor. See, Harland had a short career in the army, but that was not how he got the title of colonel. The title was given to him in 1935 by the governor of Kentucky as an honor in recognition of his contribution to the state. Not long after, food critic Duncan Hines included the restaurant in his 1935 Road Food Adventures and Good Eating as one of the good eating places along the highways of America. By 1937, his food had become so popular by word of mouth that people came to visit him from different states. So he expanded his gas station to include a hotel and a cafe that could seat 142 people. Around this time, he discovered a huge problem. He couldn't pan-fry the chickens fast enough. To cook a chicken after an order is placed, the customer had to wait for 30 minutes. If he made a batch in advance, he often had to throw away pieces at night. The only other option was deep frying, that is, amassing the chicken into a wire basket and deep fat. While this cooked the chickens faster, it made it dry, crunchy, and unevenly done. But luckily, Harland discovered the pressure cooker, which was a new invention at the time. Everything changed after he made a historic breakthrough and came up with the new idea of using the pressure cooker for cooking his chickens as well. After many experiments, he found the right balance of pressure, cooking time, meat fat, and fat filtration. The pressure cooker sealed in the chicken's flavor, preserves its moisture, and gives it a soft finish that wasn't greasy or crusty. But more importantly, it also cut down the cooking time to just 8 or 9 minutes. At that time, he was still refining his seasoning. He started up with peppers and salt and ended up making several different kinds. Then one day, he got an order for 500 fried chicken meals. Since they weren't for his regular customers, he decided to try out a new seasoning. And it turned out to be the best fried chicken he had ever had in his life. So he stuck with it and called it his secret blend of 11 herbs and spices. After building a second hotel and cafe in Asheville, North Carolina, his first one in Corbin burnt down on Thanksgiving. By the time he had rebuilt it, there weren't any more tourists or vacationers around because of the Second World War. Gas was also rationed during the war. As a result, his customer base shrank, causing him to close down the hotel. He eventually chose to sell the restaurant. He went straight into working for other restaurants and cafeterias. When the war was over, Harland started another restaurant in Georgetown. In 1953, he received a call from a real estate agent who offered him $164,000 in cash for his hotel and cafe. But Harland turned him down because his business, which was right on the highway at the time, was booming, as 90% of his customers were tourists. The agent still called him the next day and tried to convince him, but he still said no. Harland thought he was set for life, but 6 months later, he regretted his decision not to sell. A highway junction moved from another side and cut down the flow of traffic. Afterwards, it was announced that a new interstate highway will bypass it altogether. He was convinced that his business was doomed, so in 1956, he auctioned it out for $75,000, less than half of what the real estate agent had offered him. Thus, at 65 years old, he had to live off his savings and security checks of $105 a month. Now, for most people, having gone through all those failures, this will be it. But for Harland, it was time for a new business idea. This time, to start a fried chicken franchise called Kentucky Fried Chicken. When Harland decided to pursue this path, he put a couple of pressure cookers and a bag of seasoning in his 1946 Ford and began traveling across the United States. Whenever he comes across a decent-looking restaurant, he will beg the owner to let him cook his chickens for the employees. If they were impressed, he will offer to stay for a couple of days and cook for the restaurant at 4 cents per chicken, hoping that it will lead to a franchise opportunity. To cover his travel expenses, he would get free meals from his friends and sleep in the back seat of his car. Not only was he turned down hundreds of times, but he was also laughed at. It was a slow and humiliating way to live, considering his age at the time. He was rejected a total of 1,009 times, but he was not one to quit. His efforts eventually paid off. His first successful franchise came in 1952, when a friend of his named Pete Harmon of South Lake in Utah agreed to sell his chickens. Harmon owned a chain of restaurants already. When sales began, everyone enjoyed the Colonel's recipe. In fact, Harmon's sales tripled in the first year he began selling the Colonel's recipe. Harmon's restaurants were also the first to pioneer the famous bucket container. It was also Pete Harmon that coined the phrase "is finger licking good," which eventually became the slogan of the KFC chain. As it turns out, appointing franchisees was a wise decision. KFC established itself as a forerunner in the food industry. Within a couple of months, Harland didn't have to make those trips anymore. People started coming to him instead. He did all the bookkeepings and all the paperwork, while his second wife Claudia Price mixed, packed and shipped their secret blend of 11 herbs and spices pre-made. Harland didn't share his recipe with his franchisees because he was scared it will fall into the hands of his competitors. By 1963, there were over 600 KFC outlets in the United States and Canada. A few more years later, that number grew to 900, with outlets in the United Kingdom and Japan. At that point, he was finally financially secure. But he worried of what will become of his company after his death. Over the years, several people have asked to buy his company, including a 29-year-old lawyer named John Y. Brown, whose father was a farmer who taught him the same work ethic Harland had learned 2 generations prior. John first met Harland when he was asked to become his full-time attorney. After he had said no, the two men ended up talking about Harland's favorite topic, which of course is fried chicken. John was surprised that Harland had hundreds of franchisees in the United States and Canada. In an interview, John shared, "When I heard that, I imagined he had salesmen everywhere. So I asked, 'Well, Colonel, how many salesmen do you have out there in the field?' And he said, 'Oh, we don't solicit. We don't believe in solicitation.'" John started to think of what will happen if they were more aggressive with sales. When he started learning about the barbecue business, he discovered that barbecue only had original appeal and that the real money was in fried chicken. So he and a man named Jack Macy decided to buy Harland's company. In 1963, they made their first offer, but Harland refused. They argued that he should enjoy his life now and that if he dies before selling his company, most of his estate will go to his taxes. They offered him $2 million, which would have been worth more than $15 million by today's standard. They also promised to maintain quality and treat his company fairly. Additionally, they said they want him to stay as an advisor and an ambassador to the company, as they believed that having Harland as the marketing face of the company will be one of their biggest assets. To Harland, their proposal made sense, but somehow it didn't feel right, as it felt like a father selling his own child. He took his time to think about it while John continued to convince him. On the 6th of January 1964, Harland finally gave in and sold his company. He was 73 years old at that point. When the sale finally fell through, he officially became a millionaire. Looking back on his journey, he said, "Every failure is a stepping stone to something better. I was rejected 1,009 times before selling my first franchise and then my company for $2 million. So many other people have strived through adversity that it will embarrass you." However, he barely stepped away from the company. He became their marketing agent and traveled around the world for various promotions, wearing his iconic white suit every day. Meanwhile, the new owners made so many important changes and opened new locations that made the business grow rapidly. But in 1971, John sold the company to a giant food conglomerate named Hublin Corporation. Unlike the previous owners who maintained a good relationship with the Colonel, the new owners made a decision that made them very unpopular with the Colonel. They tampered with his recipe. They changed the gravy to something that was cheaper and easier to make. In fact, one of the company's executives said, "Let's face it, the Colonel's gravy was fantastic, but you'd have to be a Rhodes Scholar to make it." The only problem they had was Harland still visited KFC stores himself, and when he tried the new recipe, he reportedly said, "My God, this gravy is horrible. They ought not to be allowed to sell it. It's pure wallpaper paste." His criticism was so harsh and so public that one KFC franchisee sued him for libel in 1978, but the case was thrown out eventually. However, Harland was so upset with the direction that KFC was taking, so upset that he opened a new restaurant in Shelbyville, Kentucky with his wife under the name Claudia Sanders, the Colonel's Lady Dinner House. He even went further and developed plans to franchise and compete with KFC. This led KFC to sue Harland over the copyrights of his name and whether he should be allowed to open a competing business using the Colonel's branding. In retaliation, Harland also sued the new owners in a separate lawsuit for misusing his name and promoting products he hadn't developed. He demanded $122 million in damages. Eventually, the case was settled, and Harland got paid $1 million instead, with the agreement that he had to stop criticizing KFC and rename his new restaurant. He changed the name to Claudia Sanders Dinner House. The restaurant still exists to this day. In fact, it is the only place that has the original Colonel's fried chicken recipe. Unfortunately, Harland was later diagnosed with acute leukemia. He died 6 months later of pneumonia at the age of 90, on the 16th of December 1980 at the Louisville Jewish Hospital. He was still working until about a month before his death, as he was a man who had no interest in retiring and sitting around doing nothing. Today, there are over 24,000 KFC outlets in over 147 countries. And it all started with a man cooking chicken at a gas station who simply refused to give up despite all the stuff that life threw at him. The KFC story proves that giving up is a surefire way to fail. If you fail at something, regardless of how many times you've tried, the possibility of succeeding is still always there. Always remember, you have never been a failure. You are just a person who has not been successful yet.